What happened to the smartest girl at your school? They used to call me the smartest girl in school. Valedictorian, National Merit Scholar, full ride to an Ivy League university. My brain was my currency, the one thing I could always rely on. It was sharp, organized, and fast. It was mine. The night my son was born, in the sterile quiet of a private hospital room, my mother-in-law, Beatrice, sat in the visitor's chair and explained, with the calm precision of a vivisectionist, how she had spent the last 2 years systematically dismantling it. I was supposed to be in a fog of exhaustion and medication, a blissful, hazy new mother. But the epidural had worn off faster than expected, and the morphine drip was slow. I was lucid. I was trapped in my own body, unable to move much, but my mind, for the first time in a long, long time, was terrifyingly clear. "You have my husband's eyes, you know," she said, her voice a low, proprietary hum. She wasn't looking at me. She was looking at the plastic bassinet where Leo slept, a tiny, perfect creature who knew nothing of the world he'd just entered. My Arthur, strong eyes, but the rest of him, that's all Mark. My son. It's a pity the boy will have your nerves. She smoothed a non-existent wrinkle on her cashmere sweater. But we can manage that. I managed it in you, after all. A cold dread, colder than the linoleum floor, seeped into my bones. For 2 years, my life had been a slow, inexplicable unraveling. It started with a tremor in my hands, then a persistent brain fog that made my graduate work feel like deciphering ancient Greek. Panic attacks, once a relic of my teenage years, came back with a vengeance, ambushing me in the grocery store in the middle of a lecture. My doctor diagnosed it as a severe relapse of my generalized anxiety disorder, exacerbated by the stress of academia. He prescribed new medications, higher doses. I saw therapists. I meditated. I did yoga. Nothing worked. The fog only thickened. I dropped out of my PhD program, a humiliation that felt like a death. Mark, my sweet, worried husband, was endlessly supportive, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. I was the smart one, the capable one. Now I could barely remember if I'd locked the front door. Beatrice sighed, a sound of theatrical patience. It was the tea, mostly. A special blend. Just a few little herbs, things a person can find in any dedicated garden. Not enough to be obvious, of course. Just enough to amplify. To create a state of perpetual imbalance. Your anxiety was the perfect foundation to build upon. A pre-existing condition, the doctors would say. And they did. She smiled. A thin, satisfied line. It made you so much more manageable. So much more dependent. My blood turned to ice. The tea. Every time she visited, at least twice a week, she brought a thermos of her calming chamomile blend. She'd pour me a cup with a flourish, telling Mark how she was taking care of his high-strung wife. I drank it because I was desperate for anything that might quiet the screaming in my own head. I drank it because refusing would have caused a scene, and I no longer had the strength for scenes. I saw it all in a sickening, instantaneous flash, every forgotten word, every dizzy spell, every wave of nausea I'd blamed on stress, every panic attack that felt alien and unprompted. It wasn't me. It was her. Why? The word was a dry rasp, barely audible. My throat felt like it was full of sand. She finally turned her gaze on me, and there was no warmth in it, only a chilling, assessorial clarity. Mark was losing his way. He was putting you on a pedestal, this brilliant mind he'd married. He was forgetting his obligations, to his family, to our name. A man needs a wife who supports him, who needs him, not one who competes with him. I simply corrected the balance. I made you the wife he needed, a bit fragile, a bit lost, someone he could protect. And now, she gestured toward the bassinet, now you've given him a son. Your primary purpose is fulfilled. You can just be a mother. No more need for all those ambitions. It was a confession, a victory lap. She was gloating, secure in the knowledge that I was a broken thing, a hysterical new mother who would be dismissed by everyone if I dared to repeat her words. Who would believe me? The woman who'd had a nervous breakdown and dropped out of her prestigious program, or the elegant, concerned matriarch who brought her daughter-in-law calming tea. She thought she had won. She thought the game was over. But she didn't know about the camera. Mark, ever the tech enthusiast and a little paranoid about hospital staff, had set up a small, discreet baby monitor on the shelf opposite my bed. It looked like a little white cube, an air freshener maybe. He'd wanted to be able to watch Leo from the hospital cafeteria on his phone. It had a motion sensor and recorded high-definition video and audio directly to a cloud server. She had just delivered her entire confession to a password-protected, time-stamped, and legally admissible audience of one. My mind, the one she'd worked so hard to shatter, was suddenly ablaze. The fog was gone, burned away by pure, unadulterated rage. I lay there, feigning the drugged weakness she expected, and let her talk. I let her detail the herbs, the timing, the way she'd feigned concern to Mark about my deteriorating state. I let her dig her own grave, sentence by sentence, while the tiny, blinking blue light on the little white cube silently bore witness to it all. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. And don't worry about Leo. I'll make sure he's raised properly, with the right values. He's a Chilton, after all. He needs a strong hand. Your influence will be minimal. She patted my hand, a gesture of absolute ownership. It took every ounce of self-control I possessed not to recoil, not to scream. I just stared at her, letting my eyes look glassy and unfocused. I needed more. I needed every last drop of her poison to be on that recording. The headaches, I mumbled, playing my part. Were they? A side effect, she said dismissively. Unfortunate, but necessary. It was important that the symptoms were confusing, a constellation of complaints, something the doctors could never quite pin down. It kept them looking at you, at your history, instead of looking for an external cause. It was really quite elegant, if you think about it. She stood up, adjusting her silk blouse. Now, you get some rest. Motherhood is draining. I'll tell the nurse you're sleeping. I'll be back in the morning to check on my grandson. She swept out of the room, leaving behind the scent of expensive perfume and the acrid taste of betrayal. The moment the door clicked shut, my body was racked with a violent tremor, a convulsion of rage and terror. I fumbled for the call button, my fingers clumsy and weak. A nurse bustled in, her face a mask of professional concern. Is everything all right, dear? Pain getting worse? My husband, I gasped. I need my husband. Now. And my uncle. Call my uncle Robert Jensen. He's a doctor at City General. Tell him it's an emergency. I was fighting for every word, the adrenaline making my heart pound against my ribs like a trapped bird. I looked at the little white cube on the shelf, my silent, perfect witness. The game wasn't over. It was just beginning. Mark burst into the room first, his face etched with worry. He saw the state I was in, the wildness in my eyes, the way I was clutching the bedsheets, and rushed to my side. Alara? Honey, what's wrong? Is it the baby? Are you in pain? The camera, I choked out, pointing a trembling finger toward the shelf. The recording. Get the recording. Beatrice, she was just here. He looked from me to the camera, his expression one of pure confusion. What are you talking about? The baby monitor? What about my mother? Before I could explain further, the door opened again. It was my Uncle Robert, still in his scrubs, his face grim. He'd obviously run over from the neighboring hospital. The nurse must have conveyed the urgency in my voice. Ellie, what's going on? He asked, his doctor's eyes immediately scanning my vitals on the monitor beside the bed. With both of them there, my two staunchest allies, the dam broke. The story came pouring out of me in a torrent of gasps and sobs, a disjointed, frantic narrative of tea and herbs, of gaslighting and stolen ambition. I told them what Beatrice had said, her exact words, her cold, clinical pride. Mark looked at me as if I'd lost my mind, his face a mixture of pity and alarm. I could see the conflict warring within him, the love for his wife versus the ingrained disbelief that his mother could be capable of such a monstrous thing. It was the reaction Beatrice had counted on. Mark, honey, you're exhausted, he said softly, trying to soothe me. You just gave birth. Sometimes the medication and the hormones, they can make things seem confusing. No, I cried, my voice raw. It's real. It's all real. The camera, Mark. She confessed to the camera. Please, just watch it. Uncle Robert put a hand on Mark's shoulder. His expression was different. It wasn't pity. It was a slow, dawning horror. He was a physician. He'd seen my medical charts for the past 2 years. He'd been as baffled as my own doctors by the sudden, intractable nature of my symptoms. He'd seen me transform from a vibrant, sharp-witted woman into a ghost of myself. For him, my frantic story wasn't the ravings of a postpartum patient. It was the missing piece of a puzzle he'd been staring at for years. "Let's look at the video, Mark," Robert said, his voice low and firm. "Let's just look." Mark, looking pale and shaken, pulled out his phone. His hands fumbled as he logged into the app. He set the phone on the bedside table, angled so we could all see. He scrolled back through the timeline to the motion-activated event from 20 minutes earlier, and then he pressed play. The room was silent, save for the tinny audio from the phone's speaker. We watched the scene unfold. We saw Beatrice walk in. We saw her sit down, and then we heard her voice, clear as a bell, weaving her tale of methodical, psychological torture. It was the tea, mostly, a special blend. It made you so much more manageable. I watched Mark's face. The color drained from it, replaced by a ghastly ashen gray. His disbelief curdled into shock, then into a profound, gut-wrenching horror. He was watching his mother describe with pride how she had systematically destroyed the woman he loved. He made a strangled sound in the back of his throat, a noise of pure agony. When the video ended with Beatrice sweeping out of the room, no one spoke for a full minute. The only sound was the rhythmic beep of my heart monitor, which had accelerated to a frantic pace. Mark sank into the visitor's chair, the one she had just occupied, and put his head in his hands. His shoulders shook with silent sobs. Uncle Robert was the first to move. He was all business, his physician's mind taking over. "Okay," he said, his voice sharp and focused. "First things first. Alara, I'm ordering a full toxicology screen, hair and blood. We need to find out exactly what she's been giving you. I want a sample of your hair taken right now, before anything can leave your system. Nurse?" He was already out the door, calling for staff. He came back in, his phone to his ear. "Yes, I need to speak with hospital security. We have a patient safety issue. A visitor, Beatrice Chilton, is to be denied all access to this floor, effective immediately. If she appears, she is to be escorted from the premises. Call the police if necessary." He hung up and turned to Mark, who was still slumped in the chair. "Mark, I know this is impossible, but you need to pull yourself together. Alara and Leo need you. I need you to download that video file to a secure location right now. Email a copy to me and to yourself. Create a backup. That is our single most important piece of evidence." Mark nodded, his movements stiff and robotic. He did as he was told, his fingers tapping numbly on his phone. I watched him, my heart aching for his pain, but my mind was a fortress of cold, hard resolve. The shock was wearing off, replaced by a singular burning purpose. She was not going to get away with this. She was not going to touch my son. She was not going to take another second of my life. The next few hours were a blur of controlled chaos. Nurses came in to draw my blood. A technician carefully snipped a lock of my hair from the nape of my neck, sealing it in a biohazard bag. Hospital security guards, burly and impassive, were stationed outside my door. Uncle Robert got on the phone with a lawyer he knew, a bulldog who specialized in complex litigation. Mark, his face a stony mask, made a single phone call to his father, Arthur. I couldn't hear the whole conversation, only Mark's clipped, furious tones. "She confessed, Dad. There's a recording. No, I'm not mistaken. She's not to come near them. Ever again." When the police arrived, 2 uniformed officers, I had to tell the story again. This time, my voice was steady. I recounted Beatrice's words, her tone, the look of satisfaction on her face. I was no longer a hysterical victim. I was a witness. They listened patiently, their expressions unreadable. They took notes. They watched the video on Mark's phone. One of them, a woman with tired eyes, looked at me with a flicker of something that looked like empathy. "We'll open an investigation, ma'am," she said. "Detective Miller will be in touch. In the meantime, the hospital has a no-contact order in place. She won't be able to get to you here." After they left, an almost unnatural quiet descended on the room. Leo slept peacefully in his bassinet, oblivious. Mark sat by my bed, holding my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my knuckles. The silence between us was heavy with everything that had been shattered. His entire world, the mother he had loved and trusted, had been a lie. My world, which had been a terrifying fog of self-doubt and fear, was now horribly, starkly clear. "I'm so sorry, Alara," he whispered, his voice thick with unshed tears. "I should have seen it. I should have protected you. I thought it was your anxiety. I believed her when she said she was worried about you." "She fooled everyone, Mark," I said, my own voice surprisingly gentle. "She fooled my doctors. She fooled me. That was the point. But a part of me, a small, cold part, knew that this would be a long road for us. He would have to reconcile the mother he knew with the monster on that recording. I would have to learn to trust his judgment again, to feel safe. The next day, the fight truly began. Beatrice, of course, did not go quietly. The first salvo came via her lawyer, a slick, expensive man whose letter arrived by courier. It was a masterpiece of legal threats and character assassination. It accused me of suffering from severe postpartum psychosis, of fabricating a delusional and slanderous story to alienate Mark from his loving mother. It demanded an immediate retraction and threatened a lawsuit for defamation. It was classic Beatrice: attack, deny, and paint the victim as the aggressor. My lawyer, a woman named Anya Davies, whom Uncle Robert had recommended, was unfazed. She was a small, sharp woman with intelligent eyes and an air of absolute competence. She read the letter over her glasses, a faint, unimpressed smile on her lips. "Standard procedure for a narcissist with a bank account," she said, tossing the letter onto the table in my hospital room. "It's meant to scare you into silence. It won't work." Anya laid out the plan with methodical precision. Step 1 was my safety and Leo's. She would file for an emergency protective order using the video as primary evidence. Step 2 was the criminal case. Detective Miller would lead that, and our role was to provide him with everything he needed. Step 3 was documentation. "I want you to write everything down, Alara," she instructed, her tone firm but kind. "Every instance you can remember of her bringing you tea, every conversation where she undermined you to Mark or to others, every symptom you felt, every doctor's appointment, every prescription. Create a timeline. Your memory is a crime scene, and we need to collect the evidence." So I began to write. In a simple spiral notebook, I started to reconstruct the last 2 years of my life. It was excruciating. I had to wade back into the fog, to relive the confusion, the fear, the shame. I remembered the metallic taste the tea sometimes had. I remembered Beatrice watching me drink it, her eyes glittering. I recalled conversations where she'd gently suggest to Mark that my memory was getting worse, that perhaps the stress of my studies was too much for my delicate constitution. Each memory was a small piece of the mosaic, and as I pieced them together, the picture that emerged was one of breathtaking cruelty. The toxicology reports came back a week later. They were the evidentiary turning point. My hair follicles, a living record of my chemical exposure, told the story. They found traces of scopolamine, also known as devil's breath, a drug notorious for its ability to induce a zombie-like state of compliance and amnesia. They also found subtoxic levels of oleander, a common garden plant whose ingestion can cause dizziness, confusion, and cardiac irregularities over time. It was a sophisticated, insidious cocktail designed not to kill, but to incapacitate, to erase. "She was microdosing you with poison," Uncle Robert said, his face pale as he read the report. "Slowly, steadily, for years. My God, Ellie, the long-term cardiac and neurological effects. We'll have to monitor you for years." The forensic report gave Detective Miller what he needed to secure a search warrant for Beatrice and Arthur's home. They found the source of the herbs in her meticulously kept greenhouse. They found books on herbalism and pharmacology with relevant passages underlined. In her browser history, they found searches for scopolamine dosage for confusion, long-term effects of oleander poisoning, and how to fake concern. It was a treasure trove of premeditation. Beatrice retaliated with escalating force. Her next move was to try and take Leo. Her lawyers filed an emergency petition for grandparents' custody, claiming Mark was under my unstable influence and that I was an unfit mother, a danger to my own child. The petition was filled with affidavits from distant relatives and family friends who I'd never met, all attesting to my history of mental instability. She was weaponizing the very condition she had created. She was turning my family against me, leveraging years of social capital and financial influence. It was during this period that I hit my rock bottom. The weight of it all, the legal battle, the constant fear, the dawning realization of how many people were willing to believe her over me, became unbearable. Mark was trying his best, but he was caught in an impossible position, grieving the mother he thought he knew and fighting the one he now did. His father, Arthur, was in complete denial, siding with his wife and accusing me of tearing the family apart. The pressure was immense. One night, after another threatening letter from Beatrice's lawyer, I found myself staring at a bottle of the anti-anxiety medication I'd been prescribed months ago. The irony was suffocating. I had been so desperate for a cure, and now the thought of a permanent escape was a seductive whisper in the back of my mind. I thought about how easy it would be to just make it all stop. The fight, the fear, the memories. I picked up the bottle, my hand shaking. Then I heard a small cry from the nursery. Leo was stirring. I walked to his room, my legs feeling like lead, and looked down at his perfect, innocent face. He was so small, so completely dependent on me for his safety, for his life. A wave of fierce, protective love washed over me, so powerful it physically knocked the air from my lungs. It was stronger than the despair, stronger than the fear, stronger than Beatrice. In that moment, I knew I couldn't give up. I wouldn't. I put the bottle of pills back in the cabinet, walked to the kitchen, and poured them all down the drain. I would fight her with a clear head, or I wouldn't fight her at all. That night marked a shift in me. The fear was still there, but it was no longer in control. It was fuel. I poured all my energy, all my intellect, the mind she had tried to steal, into my own case. I worked with Anya for hours every day, organizing my timeline, cross-referencing my journals with my medical records. I became an expert on my own poisoning. I could recite the dosages, the symptoms, the chemical compounds. I was no longer just the victim of the crime. I was its primary investigator. The family court hearing for custody was our first real confrontation. I had to sit in the same room as her, a few feet away, and listen to her lawyer paint me as a hysterical, vindictive madwoman. Beatrice sat there, the picture of aggrieved elegance, dabbing at her dry eyes with a silk handkerchief. It was a masterful performance. But we had the video. We had the toxicology report. We had the evidence from her computer. Anya played the hospital room recording for the judge. The courtroom was silent as Beatrice's calm, cruel voice filled the space. I watched the judge's face, a stern, impassive woman in her 60s. Her expression didn't change, but a muscle in her jaw tightened. When the video finished, she looked at Beatrice, her gaze cold as steel. The emergency custody petition was dismissed with prejudice. The judge issued a restraining order so severe that Beatrice was barred from being within 1,000 feet of me or Leo. It was the first victory. It tasted like oxygen after years of suffocation. The criminal investigation moved at a glacial pace. It took months of legal maneuvering, pre-trial motions, and delays tactic from Beatrice's high-priced legal team. They tried to have the video thrown out, claiming I had recorded her without her consent. Anya argued successfully that a hospital room has no reasonable expectation of privacy. They tried to discredit the toxicology report, bringing in their own hired gun experts to sow doubt. Our experts held firm. Throughout this time, Beatrice's campaign of coercion continued. She reached out to Mark through his father, offering a truce. The offer was simple. If I dropped the criminal charges, she would provide a generous trust fund for Leo and never contest custody again. It was a bribe wrapped in a threat. Mark refused, without even consulting me. "There is no price for what she did to you," he told me, his voice shaking with a quiet rage that had been building for months. He had finally, fully, grieved the loss of his mother and accepted the reality of who she was. He was my partner in this, completely and without reservation. His loyalty was the bedrock that allowed me to keep fighting. Some family members came around. A cousin of Mark's, who had always been suspicious of Beatrice's domineering nature, called to offer her support and testify on our behalf about Beatrice's long history of manipulative behavior. Others, however, doubled down, choosing to believe Beatrice's narrative. They ostracized us, sending cruel messages, accusing me of being a gold digger, a homewrecker. We learned who our real family was, and it was a much smaller circle than we had thought. My own support network, Uncle Robert, a few close friends from college, my therapist, became my lifeline. They were the ones who reminded me of who I was before the poison, the intelligent, capable woman who was still in there. The day the trial began, nearly a year and a half after Leo's birth, I felt a strange sense of calm. The fear and anger had been distilled into a sharp, cold focus. I was ready. I sat in the courtroom, Mark on one side, Anya on the other, and watched as the prosecution laid out its case. They presented the evidence methodically, the video, the toxicology reports, the search history, the herbs from her greenhouse. Expert witnesses explained the effects of the poisons she had used, describing the cognitive impairment, the memory loss, the induced paranoia. They were describing my life for the past 3 years. Then it was my turn to testify. As I walked to the stand, I could feel Beatrice's eyes on me. It was a look of pure hatred. I sat down, took a deep breath, and focused on the grounding techniques my therapist had taught me. I felt my feet flat on the floor. I felt the solid wood of the witness box. I looked at the prosecutor, not at her. For hours, I answered his questions, my voice clear and steady. I told the jury about the fog, the confusion, the terror of losing my own mind. I walked them through the timeline of my symptoms, correlating it with Beatrice's visits. I described the moment in the hospital room, the chilling calm in her voice as she confessed. I was reclaiming my story, telling it in my own words, in a public forum where she could not twist it, could not deny it. Then came the cross-examination. Beatrice's lawyer was brutal. He was a shark, and he came at me with everything he had. He brought up my history of anxiety, trying to paint me as inherently unstable. "Miss Jensen," he began, his voice dripping with condescension. "You've had a diagnosed anxiety disorder since you were 16, is that correct?" "Yes," I replied calmly. "It was well managed with therapy and, when needed, medication, for over a decade before my symptoms suddenly and inexplicably worsened." "So you are prone to panic? To catastrophic thinking?" he pressed. "I am prone to a medical condition," I said, looking directly at the jury. "A condition that my mother-in-law knew about, and which she exploited to poison me without detection." He tried to twist my words, to trap me in contradictions. He suggested I was on a vendetta, that I was jealous of Beatrice's relationship with her son. He tried to portray me as a weak, hysterical woman who had hallucinated a confession in a postpartum haze. But I was prepared. Anya and I had gone over every possible line of attack. I refused to be rattled. I answered every question with facts. I had my journals. I had the medical records. I had the truth. My mind, the very thing she'd tried to destroy, was now my greatest weapon. It was clear, it was organized, and it was fighting for its life. The most damning moment for the defense came when Anya called Mark to the stand. He spoke about the changes he'd witnessed in me, the vibrant, brilliant woman he'd married slowly fading away. He spoke of his mother's constant, cloying presence, her subtle campaign to undermine my confidence. Then Anya asked him about the baby monitor. "Why did you install it, Mr. Chilton?" "I was a nervous new dad," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "And a small part of me, a part I didn't want to admit, was worried about leaving Alara and the baby alone with my mother." I told myself it was about the hospital staff, but that wasn't the whole truth. There was always something off about how controlling she was. I just never imagined the scope of it. The trial lasted for 2 weeks. On the final day, the prosecution played the hospital room recording one last time during its closing arguments. The jury listened intently, their faces grim. Beatrice's calm, cruel voice filled the courtroom, confessing to years of calculated abuse. "I made you the wife he needed. A bit fragile, a bit lost." As the recording ended, a profound silence fell over the room. Beatrice sat at the defendant's table, her face a mask of stone. She showed no remorse, no fear, nothing. The jury was out for less than 4 hours. When they filed back in, my heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I squeezed Mark's hand, my knuckles white. The foreman, a middle-aged man with a tired face, stood and handed the verdict to the bailiff. He wouldn't look at Beatrice. I knew then. The clerk read the verdict. "On the charge of attempted murder, we, the jury, find the defendant not guilty." A gasp went through the courtroom. My stomach plummeted. Her lawyer had successfully argued that her intent was to manage, not to kill. But the clerk wasn't finished. "On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon, to wit, a poisonous substance, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of felony child endangerment, we find the defendant guilty." It was a partial victory. A bittersweet verdict. She wasn't a murderer in the eyes of the law, but she was a poisoner. She was a felon. Justice wasn't perfect, but it was real. Beatrice's face finally cracked. A flicker of disbelief, of pure narcissistic rage, crossed her features before being replaced by her icy composure. She was sentenced to 15 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole in 10. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me one last time. Her eyes were not the eyes of a defeated woman. They were the eyes of a predator who had been temporarily caged, promising retribution. I met her gaze and held it, and for the first time I felt no fear, only a vast, empty peace. The end of the trial was not the end of the story. It was the end of a chapter. Life afterward was a slow, deliberate process of rebuilding. There were still civil suits to contend with, divorcing Mark from his family's shared assets, ensuring Beatrice could never profit from any family holdings again. Arthur, predictably, spent a fortune on her appeals, all of which were denied. He never spoke to Mark or me again. The part of the family that had sided with her vanished from our lives completely. A painful amputation, but a necessary one to save the rest of the body. I continued therapy, not just for the trauma, but for the long, slow work of reclaiming myself. I had to learn who I was without the fog. At first, the clarity was jarring. My mind felt too fast, too loud. I had to relearn how to trust my own perceptions, my own instincts. For a long time, every cup of tea, every headache, every moment of forgetfulness sent a jolt of panic through me. The ghost of her control lingered. But slowly, with time and a lot of work, I began to heal. I found joy in the small things. Leo's first laugh, the changing of the seasons, the simple pleasure of reading a book and being able to follow the plot from one page to the next. My memory returned, sharp and clear. My wit, my ability to debate and analyze, came back like a long-lost friend. I was myself again, but a different version. This version had scars. This version understood, in a way I never had before, the depths of human cruelty. But it also understood the incredible, stubborn resilience of the human spirit. I never went back to my PhD program. The ambition I'd had for a life in academia was gone, burned away by the ordeal. It felt like it belonged to another person, another life. Instead, I found a new purpose. I started volunteering with a victim advocacy group, helping others navigate the labyrinthine legal system. I shared my story, not the gory details, but the lessons I'd learned about evidence, about documentation, about the importance of building a support system. I helped people who, like me, had been told they were crazy, that their abuse wasn't real. I helped them find their voices. Today, Leo is 5 years old. He is a bright, happy, and boisterous little boy who has my eyes and Mark's easy smile. He knows nothing of his grandmother, other than that she is a person who is not in our lives because she hurt me. One day, when he is old enough, I will tell him the whole story. I will teach him about boundaries, about consent, and about the kind of quiet, insidious evil that can wear the face of love. It is a hard lesson, but a necessary one. We live a quiet life now. Mark changed careers, leaving his father's company to become a high school science teacher. He needed something real, something that had nothing to do with the legacy his family name represented. We sold our old house and bought a small place in a different town, a place with no memories of her attached to it. We have a small circle of dear friends and, of course, Uncle Robert, who is Leo's favorite person in the world. Our life is not the one I imagined when I was that ambitious, brilliant girl with the world at her feet. It's smaller, quieter, and infinitely more precious. Sometimes, I think about Beatrice in her prison cell. I don't feel anger anymore, or even hatred. I feel a kind of resigned pity for a woman so consumed by jealousy and a need for control that she would destroy lives to satisfy it. She took 3 years of my life. She tried to take my mind, my marriage, and my child. She failed. She is a ghost from a past that no longer has power over me. My name is Alara Jensen. I am a mother, a wife, an advocate, a survivor. I am still the smartest girl from my school. My brain is my own again. And as I sit here on my porch, watching my son chase fireflies in the twilight, I know that this life, this hard-won, beautiful, peaceful life, is the ultimate vindication. This is the victory she can never touch.